Chapter 4. A. Don't follow your passion, yet. While I was growing up, my mom got laid off a lot. She went from job to job: a dishwasher, seamstress, maid, getting the pink slip every couple of months. She blamed racism and her inability to speak fluent English. When I was in high school, she went to community college and got a certification for electronics assembly, which helped her get higher paying work. She even stayed on somewhere longer than a few months. But then the tech bubble burst, and she was once again let go. All this instability caused her a ton of anxiety, and she became paranoid and depressed. She rarely slept, and she constantly accused unseen enemies of plotting to kill her. She called the police on our neighbors so many times that 911 blacklisted our phone number. This just fueled her downward spiraling mental state, which she took out on me and my dad. When it was time to pick a field in university, I knew I had to be careful. By this time, our family finances had stabilized somewhat, but we were still sending money back to China, and, like my dad 40 years earlier, I knew I had exactly one shot. I couldn't risk graduating without being able to find a job. My degree had to help me become independent as quickly as possible. I didn't want to end up like my mom. I didn't follow my passion. The year was 2000. The Backstreet Boys were on top of the charts. The world hadn't blown up from Y2K, and for most people, a degree was just a means to an end to getting a job. In fact, even though it seems like it's been around forever, the phrase "follow your passion" is relatively new. According to Benjamin Todd, CEO and founder of 80000hours.org, the phrase spiked around 2005, when Steve Jobs gave a commencement speech at Stanford, in which he said, "There's no reason not to follow your heart." Nowadays, we hear that advice over and over again, drawing young graduates like moths to a flame. It's sexy and empowering. It's also dangerous. When it came time to pick a college, I evaluated my options mathematically. I pored over every university's website to figure out how much each degree would cost and weighed that against income statistics. I was most interested in 1. Writing, 2. Accounting, 3. Computer engineering. Writing was my number one choice. But was a creative writing degree a good investment? A 4-year program in Canada would have cost me about $40,000, and way more if I went with a US school. I learned that writers can make anywhere from $500 to $50,000 to millions per year if you're Stephen King, with the average income at $17,000. Next, I looked at the hourly minimum wage, which I reasoned was how much I could earn right out of high school. At the then minimum wage of $6.85 an hour, I'd be looking at $14,248 a year. I subtracted that from my expected salary. This degree was worth drum roll, $2,752 a year. Next, I did the same calculation, using the in-province tuition cost at the time, for accounting and computer engineering. I stared at my notepad, the wheels inside my head turning. Grabbing my trusty calculator, I divided the rightmost column by the middle one. This gave me a single number I could use to rank my options or pay over tuition, or pot, score, tee. For every dollar you spend on a degree, multiply that by the pot score. That's how much money you can make above minimum wage after graduation. Every dollar I spent on an accounting degree meant I would earn 1.83 times more than my tuition. Computer engineering was even better, giving me a 2.81 multiplier on my tuition. Unfortunately, creative writing, my childhood dream, came in dead last. Computer engineering was the clear winner. I chose Waterloo because it had an internship program that allowed me to work while getting my degree, which meant I could pay off my tuition during undergrad. Not only would I end up with zero debt, I'd have 2 years of experience on my RA copyright, some A copyright. I have to admit, the idea of going to university for computer engineering didn't exactly make my heart skip a beat. I grew up wanting to write stories, not code. But I didn't have a trust fund, and my parents needed me to stop adding to their financial burden. I had to make the hard choice, but the one the math told me was right. But you might say, what about doing something you love and being fulfilled and all that jazz? Don't you want me to be happy? Of course I want you to be happy. But one of the biggest lies we've been sold is that following our passion is the key. Statistically, following your passion will lead to unemployment or underemployment. Those of us who grew up poor know that we're unlikely to wake up excited each day when we're worried about where the next meal is going to come from or whether we'll have to choose between electricity and hot water this month. Not only that. Passions change, people change. What lights you up could be very different a few years from now than it is today. One psychology study at Harvard and UVA found that nearly all 19,000 participants reported that their passions had changed significantly over the previous 10 years. Encouraging people to base their career on what they love when they're 18 is like encouraging them to exclusively dress like their favorite band from high school. In which case I'd be writing this book while dressed like Scary Spice. And nobody wants that. Passions don't necessarily make good jobs. I'm passionate about cat videos, travel, and stuffing my face with pad thai, but that doesn't mean I can turn those interests into a career. And even if I could, it doesn't mean I should. Even now, when I'm doing something I love here writing, there are still days when I want to tear my hair out. There are parts of every passion that, when turned into a full-time job, suck. I love writing, but that doesn't mean I love rewriting chapters over and over again, or getting rejection letters from agents, or poring over the dense legalese of a publishing contract until my eyes bleed. The only reason I'm able to pursue writing now is because I'm not dependent on it to pay the bills. Work is rarely fun when you have to worry about your next paycheck. Work is even less fun when you're forced to be creative on a schedule because you have no other choice. And this is all assuming you are lucky enough to be working in a field you love. Passions don't equal happiness. Happiness, which we'll talk about more in Chapter 8, has to do with the intersection of expectations and reality. Culturally, we expect our work to be engaging, give us autonomy, pay us fairly, let us collaborate with people we like here and be fulfilling. But the idea that each of these conditions can be met, forever and ever, is false. You can't control how much you get paid, how many jobs exist in a certain field, how great your coworkers are, or whether the job will still exist a year from now. Follow the math instead. I had completely forgotten about that little pay over tuition exercise until I sat down to write this book. When readers write in for help with their finances, I often say, time to math shit up, before I break down the numbers. As it turns out, I was mathing shit up all the way back in high school. Rediscovering those pot scores inspired me to test them out on all sorts of careers I didn't consider back then. Let's see what this tells us about many of our dream jobs using updated numbers from the US in 2018. Pretty rough. When readers write in from one of these fields, it's not a surprise if their finances aren't in the best shape. But what does surprise me is when readers from stereotypically lucrative careers like doctors or lawyers write in. How in the world can a doctor be in financial trouble? These high-paying careers aren't much better than a career in the arts. Sure, you can expect to make a six-figure salary, but the combination of the length of time to become qualified and the expensive tuition can be lethal. These tuition numbers are for in-state public schools, by the way. Go to a private college and the math gets even worse. Plus, we're not even taking into account the loss in earning power from the extended time in school. It was a light bulb moment for me. It explains all those doctors who are still struggling with their finances a decade after graduating. The pot system also reveals that you don't need a degree at all to have a fruitful career. Here's what happens when I run the math for a plumber. Since being a plumber only requires a 2-year associate's degree from a community college, the tuition costs are low, and the median salary is so relatively high that plumbers get an amazing bang for their buck. Not only that, plumbers have a huge built-in customer base. All buildings have pipes, they're impossible to outsource, and in big cities like Chicago and New York, where supply is low and demand is high, they can make as much as $70,000 a year. Who knew? And by the way, this is a good exercise not just for a high school senior, or most of us are long past that point, but for anyone thinking about switching careers. Now, I realize this chapter might be depressing to some of you. I'm not here to tell you things you want to hear, I'm here to tell you the truth. But remember that the rule is don't follow your passion, yet. I'm not saying you can't ever make money doing what you love. After all, you're only reading this because I eventually was able to become an author. But you have to follow the rest of my advice first. Doing what you love and helping for money to follow is risky. Follow the money first, and you can do what you love later. Not all degrees are created equal. Don't follow your passion, yet. Follow the pot. And, yes, I wrote this entire chapter just to be able to close with that line. I regret nothing. Chapter 4 Summary. Following your passion is a bad way to pick a career. Instead, you should pick a career based on its pay over tuition, pot, score. Pot score equals median salary above minimum wage, total cost of degree. A high number means money spent on tuition will have a greater effect on your income. Chapter 5. AIOU, that is, IOWNU. As I mentioned, growing up the way I did taught me a lot. There was one part of my cultural background that came in especially handy. Statistically, Chinese citizens have an average savings rate of 38%. That is massive compared to the American rate of 3.9% and the Japanese rate of just 2.8%. What's going on here? Is Chinese culture just naturally more frugal than others? I went to my best source, my dad. He said that even before the communists came to power, government corruption was so common it was just a way of life. Whenever someone did you a favor or lent you something, you were expected to repay them, either through political favors or with money. Over time, it became ingrained in the national psyche that being in debt to someone gives them power over you. During Chinese New Year, you have to settle any debts and start with a blank slate or be cursed with bad luck all year. Admittedly, this is the definition of anecdotal evidence, but there are other explanations. First of all, debt was not available to the Chinese for most of our country's history. The first credit card wasn't even introduced there until 1985. Compare this with the Western world, where credit cards came to the market in 1953. When I was growing up, the concept of credit was completely foreign to me. I didn't know what a credit card was, had never heard of a bank loan, and had no clue how a mortgage worked. If my parents wanted a big-ticket item, like a bicycle or a watch, they saved up. Buying on credit and paying it back later wasn't an option. You simply had the money to buy it or you went without. Second, due to the lack of a social safety net in China, we have always had to fend for ourselves. Education, healthcare, retirement. It was all up to us. Finally, the expectation of catastrophe was drilled into my parents' generation, and that mindset that shit can hit the fan at any moment defined how they saw the world. The idea of relying on the government was laughable. The government's job isn't to help you. Their job is to find new and creative ways of making your life immeasurably worse. This all taught me that debt had to be avoided at all costs, and that if I wanted something I'd have to earn it. I didn't get a credit card until after I graduated from college. At work, I would sit back and watch as my friends and coworkers went nuts with debt, spending money they hadn't earned, while patting themselves on the back for being fiscally responsible by buying the basic Tesla model instead of the one with all the fancy features. I've since realized why debt is so destructive. Debt removes the link between time and money. And when that happens, people start making bad decisions that blow up their finances. How debt works against you. Einstein is supposed to have said, compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. As you earn and save, your money makes more money, and that money makes even more money. Literally every finance book available talks about this, and all agree that it's a very good thing. But what if it's not a very good thing? What if it's a very, very bad thing? I'm sure everyone's heard that E equals MC. Allow me to introduce you to Luca Pacioli's Rule of 72. Here's how it works. If you know the return you're earning on an investment, say, 6% per year, divide 72 by that number, 72, 6 equals 12. This gives you the number of years it'll take for your money to double. If I invest $1,000 with a return of 6% a year, it'll compound into $2,000 in 12 years without my investing another cent. That balance goes up over time, because the money I make makes more money, which in turn makes even more money. When you're an investor, the rule of 72 is your friend. It helps your money grow. But if you have debt, the rule of 72 is your enemy. It works against you to take what little money you have. Credit cards typically have interest rates around 20%, so if I borrow $1,000 to buy a flat-screen TV, it would take only 72, 20 equals 3.6 years for my debt to double. Another 3.6 years and the debt quadruples. This is why debt is so scary. If you don't kill it, the debt monster gets bigger and bigger until it's consuming everything in its path. Don't let the monster get that big. We have to slay it now. Future you versus current you. Another reason debt is so dangerous is because debt distorts the value of money. Back in China, when my parents didn't have money, they couldn't buy anything. There were no credit cards, no lines of credit, nothing. If they couldn't afford something, they simply didn't get it. And you know what? Thinking back, it's a decent system. Nowadays, every idiot and their cat can get a credit card. And when they do, it's so easy to forget how precious money is. Because money is a stand-in for time. In order to buy a $100 watch, my parents would have had to earn each dollar through manual labor. At the rate of 44 cents a day, the amount they got paid, it would have taken them 228 days, and that doesn't consider funds set aside for food, clothing, and basic living expenses. One TV would have required at least a year of work. Debt changes all that. Debt allows someone to get that TV right now, using money that seemingly appeared out of nowhere. Down the road, that TV will cost double or more, but that's a problem for future you. Present you is busy enjoying their brand new TV. By disconnecting money and time, debt screws over your future self. These days, Americans owe $13 trillion for and Canadians $1.8 trillion, and it's no wonder. When the value of things we purchase is no longer tied to the number of hours we had to work for them, it's easy to take this funny money and blow it. The problem is, eventually present you will become future you. And then what are you going to do? First, do whatever you can to avoid going into massive debt. It's the worst financial mistake you can make. That being said, a lot of us are already far down that road and trying to make our way back to financial freedom. What are we supposed to do then? Glad you asked. Consumer debt. When it comes to types of debt, consumer debt is by far the worst. It's a blood-sucking vampire. Not only does it bleed you dry, it makes you terrified of the sun by trapping you indoors, shopping for crap you don't need, and/or shackled to your desk for years. Since consumer debt has the highest interest rate, you want to slay this bad boy first. Consumer debt should be treated as what it is, a financial emergency that you have to take care of now. Here are a few things you can do to sharpen your stake. 1. Cut expenses to the bone, even if it hurts. Consumer debt has the highest interest rate of all and, as per the rule of 72, doubles faster than any other type of debt. You need to treat this as a crisis. There is absolutely no point in investing or even saving much cash if you're carrying debt with a 10–20% interest rate. Paying it off should be your number one financial priority. If you need to get a side gig or a roommate, or learn to say no to dinners out, do it. 2. Order your loans based on interest rate, highest to lowest. If you have several vampires at your neck, kill the one with the highest interest rate first. That one sucks the most blood and grows the fastest, making it doubly dangerous. First, pay the minimum monthly payment on all of your cards to make sure you don't go into default, which would make things even harder to deal with. Next, make the biggest stake ever, all the cash you can scrape together, and stab the nastiest bloody sucker, the one with highest interest rate, straight in heart. Paying off the smallest loan might make you feel better, but you're trying to kill a monster here, not boost your self-esteem. Remember, your goal is to let the credit card companies take as little of your hard-earned money as possibly so you can invest it, which we'll talk about in Chapter 10, and taste that sweet, sweet freedom sooner. 3. Refinance your loan. Many credit card companies run promotions allowing you to transfer balances between cards and pay 0% interest for a set period of time, usually a year. These help you along by reducing your debt's interest rate. Don't simply transfer your debt around. Do this only if you're sure you can pay it off within that grace period. These companies are hoping you can't, because then the interest rate skyrockets and you get screwed again. Be careful. When readers ask me how to invest while they're carrying consumer debt, I tell them they're trying to run a marathon with a parasite on their back. There's no point. You'll run out of energy in the first mile. No matter how good the returns, the interest rates on your debt will immediately devour them. Slash your expenses and destroy that vampire first. Student debt. In terms of interest rates, student debt is the second scariest. Even though it typically carries a lower interest rate than consumer debt, 4–8% instead of 10–20%, it's the only debt you can't discharge in bankruptcy. You can run and hide, but it's always following, like that red ghost from Pac-Man. However, this is only true for Americans. There are complex rules for Canadians, but you can do it. This is why it's critical to figure out your pot score from Chapter 4 before choosing a field, if possible. If you're reading this knee-deep in debt without a job that pays enough to help you out of it, you still have options. Payment reduction. Most student debt is held by the federal government, which has some advantages. Namely, it provides ways to reduce how much you owe each month if you don't make enough money or unexpectedly lose your job. This doesn't reduce the total balance, but it prevents you from defaulting, which would make the situation way worse. Using a payment reduction plan is like eating one of those white pills in Pac-Man. It doesn't make the ghosts go away, but at least they stop chasing you for a little while. There are 4 types of income-driven repayment plans. Repay. A revised pay-as-you-earn. Repay has the lowest barrier to entry and is the most forgiving income-driven repayment plan. It's open to all graduates with federal direct loans, regardless of when you took out the loan. You are even eligible for loan forgiveness in 20 years for undergraduate degrees and 25 years for graduate degrees. On this plan, the maximum you will ever pay is 10% of your discretionary income, which is defined as after-tax income minus 150% of the federal poverty level. At the time of this writing, if you're single, the U.S. poverty level is $12,140, so 150% of the poverty level is $18,210, $12,140, 1.5. If your after-tax income is $30,000, your discretionary income would be $30,000. $18,210 equals $11,790 per year, or $982.50 per month. Under rebate, your monthly payment would be limited to 10% of $982.50, or $98.25. Pay as you earn. Pay is an older version of rebate with more red tape. Generally, you are only eligible if you graduated college in 2012 or later. This is because you can't be a new borrower as of October 1, 2007, and have received part of the loan on or after October 1, 2011, like rebate. Your monthly payment is limited to 10% of your discretionary income, and your loan is forgiven after 20 years. IBR.A Income-based repayment. IBR limits your payment to between 10 and 15% of your discretionary income depending on whether you're a new borrower after July 1, 2014. Outstanding loans are forgiven after 25 years if they were taken out before July 1, 2014, and 20 years for loans taken out after that date. ICR.A Income Contingent Repayment. ICR limits your payment to 20% of your discretionary income but calculates discretionary income slightly differently, as after-tax income a 100% federal poverty level. Outstanding loans are forgiven after 25 years. Remember, these plans don't magically make the loan go away, they only keep you from defaulting if you aren't able to pay them back at the moment. They do, however, make you eligible for loan forgiveness 20 to 25 years down the road, but we'll discuss why this isn't a silver bullet either. Each program has eligibility requirements depending on what type of loan you have, so contact your loan provider or go to studentaid.ed.gov to see your options. Loan forgiveness. Let's talk loan forgiveness. It sounds like signing up for a repayment plan is a no-brainer given that they have loan forgiveness options, right? Well, not exactly. In the United States, student loans that are forgiven are added to your taxable income, so while your loan may go away, a portion becomes an IRS debt. If you don't have the cash to pay off that tax bill, you then have to negotiate with the IRS to see if you can get on one of their repayment plans or try to discharge the tax debt through bankruptcy, which could take years. You could easily be in your 50s by the time you get rid of that damn debt. See what I meant when I said that student debt is like the red ghost that just follows you around forever? The big exception is the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. If you work for a non-profit or the government, the PSLF forgives all your debt after 10 years of income-based payments, and that amount actually does go away. No surprise tax bill, just buy debt. The strangest thing about this program may be how little people seem to know about it. Most folks think it only applies to charity workers, but many jobs qualify. Teachers are generally eligible since they tend to work for the state. Healthcare workers, too, if they work for a non-profit hospital, ditto for academics at universities run by the state. If your employer has any connection to the government whatsoever, check with your HR department to see if you qualify. You can have any of these loans: federal subsidized, unsubsidized, Stafford, direct loan, federal direct plus loan, federal direct consolidation loan. Look closely. Even if you have the wrong type of loan, you might be able to consolidate it into a federal direct consolidation loan, and then all of a sudden, it's eligible. The really tragic thing about the PSLF is that in order to qualify, you have to make 10 years of payments toward the right loan type. If you've been making payments on an ineligible loan, they don't count toward the 10-year time frame. But if you work for a qualified employer, have a qualified loan, or consolidated it, sign up for one of the repayment plans above, and make your payments on time for 10 years, it's possible to get rid of your student loan once and for all. If you're Canadian, I'm happy to report that navigating your student loans is far simpler. The Canadian government has something called the Repayment Assistance Plan, which, depending on family income, will reduce the monthly amount you pay toward the loan. For Americans, if their reduced payment is less than the interest they owe, their loan gets bigger, but for Canadians, the government will pay any interest, preventing the loan from increasing. Additionally, your loan will be forgiven after 15 years, with none of that taxable income crap that the Americans have to put up with. It's a federal program, so it's available to everyone, QO Canada. There are also more specialized programs, depending on your field and province. If you're a nurse or family doctor, there are separate assistance programs for you. If you live in British Columbia, there's one for you, too. And if you live in Newfoundland, you don't have to pay it back ever, since they converted all their student loan programs into a grant-based system back in 2015. So, check with your province, and see what you qualify for. You may be pleasantly surprised. Refinancing. Refinancing is your final tool. Refinancing transfers your loan from a public to a private lender, which can reduce your interest rate. Be super careful here, because once you do this, you lose the safety net of a federal loan, like the ability to lower your payments using income-based repayment programs, and your loan is still non-dischargeable in bankruptcy. You also can't have your loan forgiven through the PSLF. For this reason, I generally advise people not to refinance their student loans unless their job is super stable, and, even then, to only refinance the portion that they can repay within a year. For example, if you're a highly paid doctor with a whopping balance, and you can put $50,000 toward your loan this year, then go ahead. Refinancing can help you save interest for the year while not sacrificing PSLF eligibility for your entire loan. Mortgage. Last, but definitely not least, is mortgage debt. Mortgages are generally the heftiest and most common debt people carry in their lives, and while housing is way too big a topic to discuss here, we'll deal with it in Chapter 9. Here are a few quick notes. because mortgages are secured against your home, the interest rates tend to be low. While consumer debt typically has rates of 10–20%, and student debt 4–8%, mortgages are as low as 3%. For that reason, it can make sense to not pay off a mortgage and invest instead, since even a conservative investment portfolio can make around 6–7% annualized. We'll cover both investing and housing later on, but for now, a rule of thumb is, if a mortgage has an interest rate of, then less than 4%, pay the minimum, invest the rest. Silence MSEC equals 943/pitch, greater than 4%, pay off the mortgage first, or refinance to below 4%. Getting into debt is one of the things that prevent us from living the life we want, because it can quickly snowball. While the best strategy is to avoid it in the first place, if you're already in debt, these tools will help you get out of it before it destroys your finances. Sharpen that stake, and good luck. Chapter 5 Summary. Debt uses the power of compound interest against you rather than for you. Credit card debt is the most dangerous category and should be paid off ASAP. Cut expenses to the bone. Pay off credit cards with the highest interest rate first. Consider taking advantage of cards that allow you to transfer balances for a temporary 0% interest rate to give you some breathing room. Student debt is the next most dangerous category because of how difficult it is to forgive. Depending on the type of loan, you may be eligible for a payment reduction program such as Repay or IBR. If you work for a non-profit or a government agency, you may be eligible for the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, PSLF, which will annul your loan after you make 10 years of qualified payments. Mortgages are the third type of debt most people encounter. If your mortgage rate is less than 4%, pay the minimum and invest the rest. If your mortgage rate is higher than 4%, pay down the mortgage before investing. Chapter 6 A. No one's coming to save you. You know how in North American preschools there's a slot reserved for snack time? In China, we had smack time. And smack time was all the time. Napping too long? Smacks. Playing incorrectly? Smacks. Smacking each other? Oh God, so many smacks. No. Violence. My teacher would scream at my classmates while raining down blows upon our 3-year-old heads. Now, before you dismiss my culture as barbaric, try to understand that growing up in China isn't like growing up in the West. Because of the sheer size of the population, school is a highly competitive system in which you are expected to do what you're told or face swift consequences. It was in this environment that my father first introduced me to the concept of kai-ku, which translates to eat bitterness. Eating bitterness is seen as strength in our culture. Accepting and pushing through pain without complaint or anger is how you build character. During the Great Famine, my dad's generation ate bitter melon, an almost inedible vegetable, because it was one of the only foods available. Dad still eats bitter melon from time to time, to remind himself what suffering tastes like. The Chinese can be a tad melodramatic. When my teacher slapped me for fidgeting in my seat, I kai-ku'd. When she kicked me for being unable to nap, For some reason I was nervous around her and couldn't sleep. I cooed. And while I never really told my dad what was happening, he had an inkling when I clung to his leg every morning, refusing to let go. 30 years later, he admitted he considered taking me out of that school. But for him, reality always overrides empathy. Sometimes your entire life turns upside down through no fault of your own, and you have to learn how to tough it out and survive. No one is coming to save you. He thought about helping me out, but he wanted me to learn how to coo. He wanted me to learn how to save myself. The problem was that despite the stereotypes associated with Asian mental prowess, the fact of the matter is that I'm not particularly smart and I wasn't that good at math. It can take me days to understand the basic concept that others breeze through. In junior high, I failed a reading test that 70% of the class passed, despite spending all my free time in libraries. In high school, physics and computers were my worst subjects. The first exams I ever took in those subjects I scored a shameful 60%. Luckily, my dad, being a mechanical engineer, was able to tutor me in those courses. But in English and reading, my parents couldn't help at all. I stayed up late every night to painstakingly make my way through Shakespeare and guides on essay writing. I knew I needed to work 10 times as hard as my peers. I gave up my summers to take extra courses. That way my workload was reduced each fall and I had more time to digest everything. I used that extra time to get a leg up on the textbooks and the practice questions. By the time I graduated high school, those 60s had turned into 90s, and I got into the computer engineering track at the notoriously brutal University of Waterloo. Which, of course, just made my workload problem even worse. I was a regular fixture in the labs, study rooms, and libraries, studying for 12 hours at a stretch and occasionally all night. It was all worth it. Even in high school, I knew that getting the right degree was my ticket. And even though I graduated near the bottom of my engineering class, because I worked my ass off with lots of unpaid overtime during my internship, I quickly landed a full-time job. My boss didn't care about my mediocre grades. He hired me because of my insane work ethic. Whenever he had extra work for me, I always said, "Bring it on." Don't get me wrong, I'm not just bragging about how I became successful because I worked hard. What I realized much later was that I worked hard because I was afraid. I was afraid that this was my one and only chance at a good life, and I didn't want to blow it. I was afraid of becoming a burden on my dad, who at the time was supporting our extended family back home. I was afraid that if I failed, I'd drag our family back down into poverty, after all the sacrifices he had made to get us out. To paraphrase the words of Ed Harris's character from Apollo 13, failure was not an option. Scarcity mindset versus entitlement mindset. Many of my peers grew up way differently than I did. They had gone to summer camp and had gotten cars or tickets to Europe as graduation presents, but after graduation they ended up unemployed and living in their parents' basements. This baffled me. I had started off poor and made it to middle class. They'd started off middle class, so shouldn't they have been ahead of me? What I later realized is that for them, that ingrained fear of failure was simply missing. When I asked what they were doing to improve their lot, they would say, "I'm sure things will work out," or "I don't know, work's not my thing." For them, failure was totally an option. I was born into a situation where scarcity was all I knew. But, as we've discussed, that mindset ended up being a blessing in disguise. Since I knew that things could always get worse, the scarcity mindset taught me that money was precious, and if I wanted security and autonomy in life, I'd have to earn it. Look, I'm not trying to shit-talk my fellow millennials. We've been maligned as the me generation for long enough, told we have an entitlement mindset that mistakes privileges for rights. This is an insanely broad generalization that doesn't consider the economic collapse that happened right around the time we were making our way into the workforce. But sometimes I did feel like I was on another planet from my peers. When you're poor in the developing world, there is no safety net. But here, there are systems in place to help you get on your feet. That's a great thing, but when it runs up against that entitlement mindset, people can become dependent on that assistance, which often comes in the form of mom and dad. According to business and economics professor Paul Harvey, a great source of frustration for people with a strong sense of entitlement is unmet expectations. If you believe that you're special, and all you have to do is find your singular passion and turn it into a perfect job, that's a recipe for disaster. The reality is that the world owes you nothing. You only become special by developing skills that are in demand, which takes focus, grit, and long-term work. Other people can help along the way, but in the end, we have to save ourselves. Why you need to save yourself. I didn't learn to swim until I was 24 years old. That surprises my friends, since after retiring at 31, I got my scuba certification and have since gone diving in Thailand, Cambodia, the Caribbean, and the Galley !pagos. But it wasn't that long ago that I was terrified of water. There weren't any recreational pools in my small village in China. After we emigrated, a few near-drowning incidents made me swear off swimming forever. So, it wasn't until I was a full-grown adult that I decided to conquer my fear. I signed up at the YMCA, embarrassed but also determined. At first, I gripped the flutterboard to my chest as if it were the precious birthday card my dad had sent me as a kid. But one day my instructor swam over and smacked it out of my hand. If you fall off a boat, do you expect a flutterboard to just magically appear? He was right, it was time to give up my crutch. Learning how to swim has been one of the most satisfying things I've done. When things don't go according to plan, you won't always have a backup. Given our economic reality of declining job stability and disappearing pensions, you can no longer rely on the government or your company to take care of you in retirement. My readers frequently write in with stories about how they were able to escape their bad circumstances. Some had help along the way, others had to struggle alone, but ultimately, they all saved themselves. For example, Susan grew up in Alberta, Canada, with blue-collar parents. Her father, having gambled away the family savings on a failed business, abused alcohol. They lived in poverty and tiptoed around him. She knew she'd been dealt a difficult hand, but that didn't faze her. Since her parents couldn't afford to put her through university, she opted to go to community college, working part-time to pay her tuition and picking a program that let her complete her degree in 2 years. After graduation, she got a job working for a shipping company, which paid around $35,000 per year. Over time, she got a programming certification and became a software developer, making $45,000 per year. After 7 years there, she got a PMP, Project Management Professional, certification, which, combined with her experience, enabled her to become a consultant earning $100,000 per year. She beat the odds of her background to make 6 figures after 12 years in the workforce. Melissa grew up in Chicago in shelters, feeling so hungry at times that she developed an unhealthy relationship with food. She got good grades but hadn't ever considered that college might be within reach. But her teachers didn't give up on her. They even paid for her SAT and ACT exams and helped her enroll in an early college program. After obtaining 5 degrees and a PhD, she now earns a 6-figure salary in the public sector. Nick grew up in Dallas, Texas, with a successful salesman father. Nick's dad was making a killing but also got into a killer amount of debt. Nick grew up with the kind of life most kids can't even dream of, but when it was time for him to go to college, his dad lost his job. The tuition money went to pay for the house, the maid, and the BMWs. For the first time in his life, Nick had to fend for himself. He worked his ass off, paying off much of his student loans by working part-time jobs while still in college. He chose a field of petroleum engineering with robust job prospects and paid off the rest within a year of graduation. Nick tells me his dad's refusing to give him money was the best thing that ever happened to him. While his siblings are still struggling with bad financial habits like their father and racking up mountains of debt, he's built a portfolio big enough to enable him to travel the world and retire overseas. Build your OWN safety net. The scarcity mindset teaches us that money is precious. The entitlement mindset enables us to kick the can of personal responsibility down the road. But we all need to learn to protect ourselves from those scary inevitabilities like layoffs and outsourcing. We need to learn how to save ourselves. To do that, we build our own safety net. Your safety net needs to feed you, clothe you, and pay for the occasional kick-ass vacation to Aruba, all without relying on a job or the government, and neither of which is as reliable as it used to be. If you become your own safety net, it won't matter whether you started off with a scarcity mindset or an entitlement mindset. You'll win either way. I spent the 9 years after graduating college coming to this realization, and my journey there was twisty and turny, full of mistakes and false starts and things I wish I had done differently. That first day, as I settled into my new job, I thought that I was on easy street. Smooth sailing from here on in. My time to kaiku was over. Turns out, things were about to get so much harder than I ever thought possible.